Okay, welcome everyone to Defining My Spectrum. This is part of the federal hiring workshop series that myself, Amy Taveras, and my colleague Rachel Rosenfeld have organized for you all. And this is part of the Alitsky Family Foundation Career Readiness Program. We often offer workshops, including the CPDC, about professional development, but also keeping neuro inclusion, mental health, and well-being, all those kinds of things in mind. So I am very excited to have Mark Oldland with us today. So Mark Oldland is a autistic adult and a neurodiversity advocate residing in Hillsborough, New Jersey. With his artwork and conversation, he strives to positively promote the abilities of the neurodivergent community. Mark received his BFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art. He then enlisted in the U.S. Coast Guard, which led to a career with the U.S. EPA in emergency response. This range of life experiences is the basis for his current art exploration, wherein he creates artwork to illustrate his spectrum to the world. Though through his work, he hopes to showcase the many abilities neurodivergent people have to offer. So I'm going to put Mark's website and Instagram in the chat, and then I'm going to give the floor to Mark.
Okay, thank you, Amy, and thank you for inviting me here to tell my story. Thank you to the university for providing me this opportunity to share my story. So to start with, whenever I tell this and it's talk about myself or my story, I need to always start with a disclaimer, and that disclaimer is that it's just that this is my story. This is talking about what my experiences through life have been as an autistic individual. So therefore, they don't necessarily reflect or define the story of other neurodivergent individuals. They hopefully do parallel enough so that those of you that are out there that are neurodivergent, you can gain some knowledge from my life experience, but also if you're not neurodivergent, you get a better sense of what it takes to bring myself to a particular space, and what I do in order to overcome some of those things that are created within what I'm calling the neurotypical space, which is what most of our environments are built up around. And that's so please keep that in mind. So let's just jump right in. And having given the disclaimer and getting that out of the way, I want to start my story by telling you another disclaimer, or at least one that appears to be as such. It is that as I go through and I talk to you, what I want you to understand is I don't want you to mistake my lack of doing for a lack of trying. So let me tell you a little bit about what I mean. So I'm very passionate about what I'm talking to you about. I really want those that I speak to in these types of talks to really take away the importance of the message that I'm trying to say. So as a result, I come up with all these great ideas. I have so many awesome ideas that are really going to hit home and communicate that and give you a really powerful wow factor. You know, and one of those things that I often think about when I go to do these types of conversations is I try to think about things that really communicate the joy and enthusiasm that I have about my autistic identity. And one of those ways is I come up with these and practice these crazy TikTok numbers, dance numbers in my head and physically in my own space, in my own time. And I'm here to tell you that after a lot of preparation, a lot of energy put forth into putting this conversation together for you, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get this great, fun, joyous dance routine at the end. And why is that? Because, you know, that's part of all this trying that I do to really come to this space for you. And it's what you really get in reality is probably about 1/1,000th, if not more than that, of what I'm actually trying to put on for you. So the actual doing is it's infinitesimal in comparison to all the trying that I do. And you say, well, that's what a lot of us do. So you hear a lot of this analogy of the duck on the water, where you see this calm duck and then there's all these little feet going underneath. What I'm here to explain is, at least for myself, and what I believe is consistent with across the neurodivergent community, is that comparison, the duck on the water, I like to alter that a little bit. Living life as a neurodivergent person, as an autistic person, it's more like a drowning duck on the water. You see all this chaos trying to just stay up and keep yourself from drowning, and that's what you see, but you don't see even all the extra stuff that's even more so underneath the surface. And so that's what I mean by when I say to you, don't mistake my lack of doing for a lack of trying. All right. So having said that last disclaimer, you got two disclaimers. You got nothing in terms of a story. I should probably tell you a little about who I am. Who am I? Why did this guy get invited here to tell his story? Well, the first thing, and what most important thing, is I am autistic. And I say that with intention. By that I mean, I am not a person with autism, or I don't see myself as a person with autism, or a person with autism spectrum disorder. I am a person whose autism defines themselves. Everything I do and say, and all the actions that I take, all the thinking that I have, everything I take in, it's all defined by the fact that I am autistic. I can't separate it from myself. It's how I was born, right? I can't suddenly come to prepare for a conversation like this and say, well, I'm just going to give you an autistic or presentation, or I'm going to give you a non-neurodivergent presentation. It doesn't work like that. If I'm giving a presentation, it's through the lens of someone who experiences life with the perspective of being autistic. All right. What else is important to understand about me? What defines me? Well, I'm a father and a loving partner, right? I'm a father of another person, an individual who's autistic himself, right? So I feel like that gives me a little bit of understanding about this topic. And in addition to that, I'm also a loving partner. So, stereotypes blown out the water. People that are neurodivergent, they can be parents, they can be spouses. And in fact, just how well spouses can be, 5 days ago was my 15th wedding anniversary. So, a pat on the back for that, or more so from my wife. But, that's important to understand about me. What else is important? What do I really want you to know about myself? Well, one of the things I'm most proud about is I'm a professional artist, or at least that's how I view myself. That's the approach I take to the artwork that I produce. I can create a range of artwork, from representational to abstract. And I've presented that artwork in a range of different places, from New York City to New Jersey. And, it's something that I'm passionate about. And I feel like it's something that I'm best suited in terms of being able to communicate. It's how I communicate most effectively about some of these topics. What else? Well, I'm a veteran. And, no, I'm not in this particular image right here, but I did paint it. And interesting side note, that particular image was painted on paper that I handmade from my own uniform. So that's something I'm proud about. It's kind of cool. It's got the Coast Guardsman in there. And I'm also, it's a piece of my veteran experience there for you to see. Also, I'm a government worker. I've been working for the US EPA for 15 years now, just as long as I've been married. And another disclaimer, I'm here in my own personal capacity. I'm not here representing the EPA at all. While I have a bunch of things I'm willing to talk to you about, willing to share a lot of my experiences as a government worker. Hopefully part of this conversation will give you some tips and tricks, whether it's seeking a government job or it's in the professional space. I hope some of these things, this part of this story, gives you some better understanding if you're neurodivergent in terms of how to be successful in those spaces. And if you're not neurodivergent, how you can help and aid individuals in being successful in those spaces. All right, so by now you've gotten 2 disclaimers. You've got a bunch of bullet points about who I am, but you got no real story. All right, you're saying to yourself, well, the story starts with a beginning, middle, and end, and we didn't start anywhere in the beginning. And all I have to say to that is you know, you got to cut me some slack. I was nonverbal for a good portion of that beginning, so it took me some time to get there. All right, so that's part of my early childhood. And then I went through a lot of difficulties because of that, because of not really necessarily having the space to bring my full self in. And part of that is because of where I, you know, the time I grew up in, where I grew up, there were a lack of resources. There weren't many things. So I fell into a lot of attempting to connect with people and ultimately getting into the wrong crowd, getting into a lot of trouble, hurting myself, hurting some other people as a result of those decisions and those choices. And all of that was because through all those struggles, nobody really defined what was going on with me. I never defined it, was able to had the skills, certainly at that time, to define it myself. And nobody at that time really had the resources to give me a formal diagnosis. I went early on, they were to a lot of different places and therapists and got some loose diagnoses, but it wasn't until later in life that I got my formal autism diagnosis. And people might say at that time, it's like, well, you've moved forward into being successful and whatever, why bother? Well, because I was struggling. I was struggling without that diagnosis. I really didn't understand or know effectively enough about myself, let alone to be able to communicate that and my needs to other people. So it was really important to get that diagnosis. It helped me understand myself, and it helped me ultimately get to a place of what I call autistic joy, which I hope to help talk to you a little bit about and give you some skills towards obtaining it yourself, whether you're neurodivergent or not. And we could define it as neurodivergent joy. It's a little rolls off the tongue a little bit, but hopefully through my story, we can help get you, if you're neurodivergent, to that place. And if you're not, if you don't define yourself as neurodivergent, hopefully we can give you the tools to help assist other people to get to that place. All right. So I spent a lot of time giving you all this stuff about, you know, what disclaimer, all this disclaimer. I talked a lot about these bullet points of this stuff, and then I, you know, really just sort of glossed over a bunch of stuff, and I spent all this time. And in reality, I've got 48 years I've got to get through. So we're just gonna have to fast forward through a bunch of stuff. So I graduated high school, did a bunch of some artworks in between, went and learned how to whitewater kayak, learned how to instruct whitewater kayaking. Let's see, then I went into art school for 2 years. Then I got out, lived out of my car on the road for a while, still continued to whitewater kayak, learned to rock climb, did a bunch of artwork in between. That wasn't that, you don't have time to show you any of that. And I went back to art school, and then I got my college degree, Bachelor of Fine Arts in Painting, from Maryland Institute College of Art. So yeah, so all right, fast forward all that, Coast Guard. Well, why did I fast forward all that? That's a lot of stuff, right? Well, here's the thing you didn't understand. Through all that time, all those things, those are a lot of times, those are the most formative years of and developmental years of a young adult life. For me, that wasn't the case. Did all of that, And all through that, I wasn't really making any real social connections. There was no reciprocation, in terms of intimate connections. It was all transactional. It was all, I was getting something out of somebody, or somebody was getting something out of me to go through all those things. It was never reciprocal. I never really truly had any friends. So here you see here me with my first development of friends. Here I'm sitting on the deck, with one of my first friends that I developed, and it was in the Coast Guard that happened. Why did that happen for me? The reason that happened is I had two main things when I look back on it. I had structure, and I had intent. And by that I mean I was given a clear set of structures of how to act in this space. It's time to be up, time to go do things. That was very structured, so I thrived in that. And I was given clear intent, which for me has always been very difficult, especially when I'm trying to deal with all that, going back to the drowning duck analogy, when I'm trying to deal with all that stuff just to even keep from drowning. So understanding intent is key, that most people get very easily, but if you're not neurodivergent, you get it very easily. But if you're neurodivergent, you don't get that very easily. It takes a lot to understand intent. All right. And that gets in the way of being productive at work. That gets in the way of being productive in just general social structures, because if you're constantly questioning what somebody's means with what they say or they do, or the reaction they have to you, it's almost impossible to bring your full self into that space, right? You're constantly going to be on edge. You're constantly going to be seeking out how to be and how to act. And what gets lost is those things that bring you happiness, those things that bring you joy. All right. So one of the things that was out of having that structure and having that clear intent that I was able to do was I was able to define and expand what I call my spectrum skills. Or more better described, those skills which bring you joy or autistic joy that have some relation to somebody outside of your understanding, your neurodivergent identity. All right. So the way to think about this is this. My son, as I mentioned, he's also autistic. And he and I are completely, in many ways, completely different. Even in how we act and respond to the world with regards to our autistic identity. For that, I mean, is he's generally what many refer to as sensory seeking. So he's constantly looking to touch, feel, get, he gets a lot out of that. Whereas I'm sensory avoidance. I really prefer to be on my own, quiet and nothing around me as much as possible in terms of sensory feedback. As a result, one of the things that he really enjoys is some of those things that gives him that immediate feedback. He loves to see and hear and feel elevators. He loves to see and feel and hear doors, automatic doors. I created this print especially for him because he just loves automatic doors so much. Back here, it's really hard to see, but there's this panel back here. It's an elevator panel. All right. He loves them so much. He loves the mechanics of it. I don't get it. It's sometimes the elevators are a little bit too much. Sometimes the doors are a little bit too much. But what I do get and what I do enjoy with him, I love a good claw machine, right? It's fun. It's got the mechanical stuff that he really enjoys. It's got a lot of stuff that I enjoy, that I'm interested in. I keep turning it off because it makes a lot of noise and it has a bright light, but it's something that he and I can share. Something else that he and I share a lot is puddle jumping. We love to jump in puddles. I've created a whole series of artwork based upon that. And, you know, he and I, we go out and jump in puddles all the time. You can see here behind me is one of the images I create. It's an abstract image for most, but for me, it's more representational in terms of not necessarily what my son and I see in out there physically, but it's more so the representational depiction of the energy we feel, the joy we feel. And so getting back to those spectrum skills, those are the things that he and I both enjoy, we're good at, brings us fulfillment and happiness that we know we are comfortable in doing, that are, while unique to us and might be, and very often is considered to be very different, still has some relatability out to somebody out there in the neurotypical space. And so when I went to the Coast Guard, I was able to define where I was at in the moment with the joy and make and identify, because I had that structure, because I had that intent, I was then able to see, okay, well, so-and-so has some similar likes and dislikes, because that structure and that intent was given to me, and I could identify, oh, this makes me happy. This also makes this person happy. All right. So when we start out, especially when we're neurodivergent, this might be a very small set of things, and it might be very, very particular and unique to you or that particular individual, like the elevators, something like that, doesn't necessarily align with what we consider to be neurotypical, but there is still enough of a relatability that you can find some other connection. And that's hard to do as a neurodivergent person when you have all this other stuff going on, when you're constantly in that drowning duck scenario. But when you have that structure, when you have that intent, it's much easier to identify those connections. So as a neurodivergent person, it's important to understand that exists. As someone who's not neurodivergent, it's important to know as well that it exists, so that you can realize that the more you can extend a helping hand to make those connections. Yeah, you may not like elevators, but maybe you do like claw machines. And that's what we're talking about in terms of finding autistic joy and supporting autistic joy. So knowing all that, in that context, I want to talk a little bit about the concept of developmental delays. And I notice I have a question mark there. And the reason I have a question mark there is because I want those of you that are here to think about the question of your understanding, especially if you're in the neurotypical space, of what a developmental delay is. So oftentimes when we think about developmental delays, we think about them in the context of an inability to do a particular thing or inability to operate in a particular space, and the key term being inability. And it's not really that. When we look at all the things we've discussed up to this point, it's not an inability. It's a lack of capability in being able to bring yourself into this neurotypical box. And why? It's because of that drowning duck scenario. We're constantly looking just to keep ourselves from swallowing a bunch of water. All right. So is it really a developmental delay between an inability to do something? More likely, that's not the case. It's just the capability to bring your full self into a space isn't there. It's lacking. And so a better way I like to think of this is thinking about those spectrum skills and that autistic joy that I'm talking about. If you have these things that you're really, really passionate about and brings you a lot of excitement and a lot of joy, and then you're asked to go to a place where you're having to do stressful things like a job, like a profession, like school, and you're asked in addition to that to put those things that bring you joy and happiness completely to the side and not be able to bring that into the space in any capacity, then it's going to be really difficult to get further and get past those delays that are there, not because you're unable, but because you're incapable of de-stressing to be able to exist in the space, because joy is necessary for de-stressing. So one way I like to say this is, imagine if you're neurotypical, if someone said to you, if your thing that you really like is baseball, I really like baseball if you can't tell, and you can't talk sports around the water cooler, that joy is taken away. None of that. Well, very frequently, if you're neurodivergent, there's not even a capability to even have that space or that joy into that space because it's thought of as strange, different, uninteresting. So it all relates. It's all interconnected in terms of being able to bring somebody fully to this space. The way I look at it, it's like a community. And that's why when I talk about my relationship with my son, I talk about building a community. And that's why I had this series about jumping in puddles with him. And in particular, that's why I created this piece, this larger piece behind me, which I call a community puddle. It's really sort of like, if you're looking for the representational aspect of it, it's sort of like a silhouette of a puddle. But like I said, for me, it's more of a depiction of that joy and excitement that he and I get from jumping into puddles. And it's also a depiction of that community that I hope that we're able to connect and expand out towards, because we have this thing that we'd like to share that more than likely, even though if you're an adult, you can still feel and connect with. I don't know if I got too far off on a tangent, but I hope you followed me on that. If you have questions, let me know. All right. So then that brings me probably to the hardest part of this conversation in terms of trying to get and relay to you some of the things that I think will help you moving forward, particularly if you are neurodivergent. But hopefully through this portion, I can give some of your non-neurodivergent support people, whether it's friends, family, whatever, some ideas of how they can help you out. So one of the hardest things with all of this, these spaces that we've created is that we have these social and professional rules that very frequently conflict with those rules that we've developed personally as neurodivergent individuals, simply to exist and be able to be comfortable to bring ourselves even to a certain space. So, for example, if one of the things that brings me happiness and joy is I like soft things, I don't like feeling constricted, that might lead or lend itself to the fact that I really am uncomfortable wearing a tie, suit and tie. All right. But very frequently, social and professional rules, especially in the profession, dictate that you've got to wear that. All right. So, as a neurodivergent individual, I have this challenge. I have to determine, in order to be successful, is this a personal rule that I am capable of and willing to sacrifice in order to bring myself into this space to get to the goal that I'm trying to achieve? And if the answer is yes, then it may be something that you consider doing. Or it may be something that you need to consider. If it's no, consider asking for assistance with. So oftentimes you can ask for a reasonable accommodation. In government world, in my particular case, there are systems and structures in place called reasonable accommodations that you should be looking to ask for. One of those things could be that if you're in as creating spaces, for example, there at Carnegie Mellon, you got to think about, are you able to, where are these social professional rules? Like, I don't think dress code would be the relevant comparison, but there are certainly certain rules, social and professional ones, that you need to think about, like, how much is this really important? Or is it something that we can sacrifice to allow more people to come into our space? And it's really hard to give you a ton of answers on that. The best guidance I can give, if you're neurodivergent, is you have to identify the goal and the priority and determine, is it something, what are the professional rules that I have to abide by, and are these things I am able to deal with and overcome? And if I'm not, what things do I need to ask for to get there? And I want to explain to you what is important for you to avoid when doing this. And this is both for individuals that are neurodivergent and those that are creating spaces for neurodivergent individuals. And that is, this particular image depicts exactly the concept I'm talking about. It's called Autistic Burnout. And in fact, that's the title, is a self-portrait. And what autistic burnout is, it's what occurs when we have to set aside our own personal rules to fit into social and professional rules that are to abide by them. So in other words, for example, you'll see me stimming a lot. All right. By stimming, that's me doing all these shakes, stims, whatever movements, and they're de-stressors for me. I didn't always used to do those. I masked them. I made the deliberate choice to mask them. But in doing so, I created a scenario where I was constantly burning out. And by burning out, I don't mean I was totally just exhausted. Autistic burnout is a specific thing. It's where you are burnout to the extent where you lose or you regress certain skills that you've gotten that are capable of doing. So, for example, for myself, if I've totally burned out, and what I'm sort of depicting there, where it's completely abstracted, that's the total burnout, I might lose the ability to communicate. I might regress back to that nonverbal state. So when you are evaluating these sacrifices you have to make, you have to determine how close are you bringing yourself on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to that full burnout phase. So that I can't give you the answer for. I would say Ideally, you would be creating spaces where you're not ever getting to that burnout phase. Ideally, we would be creating neurodivergent spaces where everybody is able to be their full self and bring their full self to the space to be able to stay in the blue, and if it at most in the red, in the middle there. But in the end, it's going to be decisions that you have to make for yourself. One area that I can give you an idea of where you can make these sacrifices that to think about is jumping back to that intent. So in order, if you're looking to have a career as a government worker, or if you're looking to have a career in any capacity in the professional life, very often you're going to have to come across having to fill out a resume or completing some questions about your abilities. All right. What's not clear and what that's not described clearly to individuals, especially the neurodivergent community, is that the intent behind that is to allow you to put your best foot forward, to allow you to describe what you are best at. What isn't clear in the intent is that you don't necessarily have to give out and describe in full detail all your shortcomings. But as a neurodivergent person and as an autistic person, it's really hard not to do that, to give you the full story. At least for me, it's always been that way. So what can we do in terms of that? Well, in terms of a neurodivergent person, we can recognize that that's a social and professional rule in terms of intent of what's being asked of us that isn't clearly communicated. And if we are creating or attempting to create neurodivergent spaces, one of the things we can do is we can start to remove those questions that really make a person think about that. For example, can you describe what your weakest points are? Or that does, it's unproductive, and it is not neurodivergent. It's not a neurodivergent question. All right. So those are some things that I've learned in terms of how to navigate the professional space, is particularly in the government space. And I'm happy to talk more specifically about that in the Q&A section. But that's sort of the place I'm coming from. And I want you to understand that as fully in terms of the experiences that I've had and what I'm able to bring to you in terms of how to be successful in these spaces. So I know I've glossed over quite a bit of stuff and I've kind of thrown a lot at you. And I keep coming back to this concept of attaining, right, autistic joy. And really what that means is finding spaces, getting to the point where you are able to be your full self. I fortunately reached that point in terms of I've gotten a support structure around me and had enough life experience around me to realize that this is who I am, and I'm comfortable with being unique, different, and as I say, an autistic individual. To get there, I had to go through a lot of all those things, a lot of the things that I anticipate that many of you are experiencing right now. But to get there, it really gets down to this joy concept, really being true to your own joy, being true to the things that define you as an individual and make you happy, and then trying to attempt to relay and make those connections, to build those connections. And then ultimately, if you're trying to create these neurodivergent spaces, the best way to do that is to develop this community, these spaces where we're able to accept people's joy for whatever it might be and allow them to bring it into this space, no matter how much we might think it's different than what we would think is something that should bring somebody happiness or not. And then once we identify those connections, participate with somebody in that, because there's no more effective way to bringing somebody into a space that they're struggling to keep their head above water in than to find what somebody makes them happy, and then allowing them to experience it, or experiencing it with them even more effectively. So with that stated, I'm providing you guys with an opportunity to get to the point or realize the thing that I realize in myself. And that is, being autistic, it's cool as bleep. And yeah, I didn't say the actual swear word because for some reason but it's still cool as bleep, right? And in knowing that, hopefully you all get to that place. Being neurodivergent is cool as bleep. And hopefully you get to that place. And hopefully Carnegie Mellon can start to create spaces for you to be able to get to that place. And one of the ways I've provided Amy and your program an opportunity to do so is to identify people within your own school who recognize this important conversation, who recognize the importance of bringing your joy into the space. And that's through this community puddle that I've created. So I hope, following this conversation, you take a moment to connect with Amy. And Amy has with her several cardstock printouts of that particular community puddle as a representation and as a signal of people that understand autistic joy, people that are willing to create a space and for you to find happiness within that university, within that community. And so as you move forward from this conversation, please stop by Amy, her office, pick up a cardstock image, post it somewhere, whether you're neurodivergent, if you're neurodivergent, to show that that's who you are and you're proud of that, or not. If you just want to keep it to yourself, just to display that you understand the concepts and that you're open to creating neurodivergent spaces. If you're not neurodivergent, exactly that. Show somebody that you're there for them. Show somebody there in your community that you're willing to, that you understand and are open to neurodiversity there on campus. And hopefully, through this, you'll start to create more spaces. That stated, that's kind of the prepared talking points that I have. I'm free to open it up to Q&A. Hopefully it wasn't too confusing, the concepts I was throwing at you, and hopefully it was productive and useful to you.
Thank you so much.
Amy?
I do have those pictures in my office, and they will also be available in the interviewing center.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Yes, I have the pictures in my office, and can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're a little faint in terms of the volume. I'm going to try to turn you up on my end.
Okay. How about me? Okay.
That's much better.
Is it? Okay. I'm really sorry, everyone. So I have the pictures in my office, and we're also going to have them in the CPDC's interviewing center in the Cohen Center on the lower level. I'm going to stop recording so that